Good morning. Happy 2023. Whether you're one that holds one day like every other day or some above another, hey, we're starting off the year on the Lord's Day with prayer and songs and worshiping God, and that's always a good thing. And I was praying this morning that we would really maximize our year, that we would bless more people this year individually and as a congregation than we ever have before. I hope that was acceptable to God in my prayer. Just maximize every day. And you know, Eleanor Roosevelt, she said, today is a gift. That's why they call it the present. I love that. And so that's my hope, is that every day when we wake up, we say, be with me, God. I want to maximize my day and glorify you and just look forward to the eagerness. Even when we know what's before us and it's not something we relish still, it's our chance to live in faith, to glorify him. So that's my hope and my prayer. So today, we are going to look at our first lesson on hospitality, probably just two. But today we're going to be in the Old Testament mainly, and we're going to look at some general truths, important, but some general truths about hospitality. And some of you here may be Christians. I know there are, because I know of a couple specifically, because of hospitality shown to you. It is a mighty tool among God's people for the strengthening of each other and for bringing others to him. So I thought we'd look at it this morning. Next week, so today, kind of general truths that apply to us. And next week, we're going to really narrow our focus in the New Testament, crystallize it, and perhaps even learn a few concepts that maybe have been there all the time, but maybe new to some of us. So that's our plan. So we started off with Abraham. We're going to look at, consider his hospitality in the verses we just read about. So rather than read them all again, just going to hit some highlights and go from there. So as you notice, when the three men, Abraham looked up and there were three men facing him. And most of you know that they were from what was read and from the context beyond that one is called the Lord. Is that God's special angel? Is that Jesus? Don't know. It's never answered, and there are different theories on it. But one has great authority. The other two are still mighty because they're angels. They're called men because that's the way they appeared to Abraham. He looked up, and we can look from the context, and we can know that he had no idea these were angels. He's thinking these are human beings, and look at his reaction. It's just so impressive to me. So he looks up and he sees the three men, the scripture calls them, because that's how they appeared, and he ran. He ran from the tent door to meet them. Now this is a wealthy, powerful, dignified man. And he sees three travelers, and we don't know what they look like, but one maybe looked like he's in charge, and so calls him my Lord. Abraham's the Lord. Sarah, she called her husband Lord. It says so in 1 Peter 3. He's a mighty man, and yet he addresses them, or at least the one in charge, as Lord, not knowing who they are. He says, please let a little water be brought and wash your feet and rest. quickly, make bread cakes. Abraham ran to the herd. I wonder how often he ran. I mean, I don't know. I'm just guessing this was not his norm. Probably walked with dignity and to his herd, but he ran to the herd, told the servant, hurry, prepare it, after he got a fattened, choice calf for his visitors. And then as they ate, he didn't sit down with them and he didn't eat with them. These three are resting underneath the tree. They're sitting there, and Abraham is standing there as a servant would. Maybe who would be more important? I mean, he's the only one in the world. You could argue with that, but God made him a special promise, unique to everybody else, that all the nations of the world would be blessed through him and through his seed. And yet he's acting like a servant, like these three other men are more important than he is, and he doesn't know that they are. But if it would have been Michael and Andy and Sue, would have done the same thing. We see that by watching him, by what we read, and by Lot, who does the same thing. Why rush? Why did he hurry, run, and all this kind of thing? To honor them. Speaking without words, he's saying, your time is very valuable. You are more important than I am. I'm going to serve you as best I can, as quickly as I can. But he rushed out of honor for them. This is true hospitality. Not that if you have people over that you have to run around the house. I'm just saying true hospitality is putting those that you're inviting over or that you're serving, putting them above yourself. And that's exactly what Abraham does right here. He would have done the same for us as well. Now, he does find out, as you know, by the things that the Lord said. Sarah will have a baby. It says she laughed to herself, not out loud. If you read it in verse 12, 13, it says Sarah laughed to herself. And the one in charge said, why did Sarah laugh? In fact, he knew her name before he ever talked to Abraham. Where is Sarah, your wife? He knew that. She laughed quietly to herself. Why did she laugh? Abraham by now is realizing these are at least servants of God. We don't know how much he knows, but things have changed now. I'm dealing with supernatural beings. And so two of them walk off towards Sodom while Abraham stays with the Lord, speaking with the Lord. And they talk about the Lord reveals he's going to destroy Sodom, of course. And the two keep going while Abraham and the Lord are speaking, or his representative. We just don't know. Now, there's an example of a man that's like, can you imagine that if Lana and Joel are walking along and they see this nice mansion and they well, let's go look at the yard and it's Donald Trump's yard. And he comes out, oh, please, don't leave yet. Don't leave it. Would you join me? Come inside and rest. And what do you like to drink? And he's running around scurrying, or anybody in power. Can you imagine that? I mean, that's parallel. Abraham was so powerful that with his 318 trained men, 13 years earlier, 318 trained men plus some men from the brothers of the sons of Mamre went and conquered 4 kings. Power and faith and goodness. And he humbles himself. It's impressive to me. Now we're going to move on to his nephew Lot and look at Lot's hospitality. Lot also was powerful and wealthy. Their flocks were so big that he and Abraham couldn't stay together anymore. He chose, as you know, Sodom. And this is right as soon as it ends with Abraham discussing with the Lord in chapter 18, and boom, the very next verse, we read about Lot. And here's what it said. Now the 2 angels, it tells us who they are. Now the 2 angels came to Sodom in the evening as Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed down with his face to the ground. Whoa, he's powerful. They're just visitors. I'm assuming they still look like men because they're going to be called men like 5 more times. And Lot doesn't know they're angels yet. The 2 angels just tell us. And by the way, did you notice the word before angels? It's the 2 angels. Not some angels. But the is referring to specific ones that we just were reading about. So here they are, 2 angels. He bows down to them, but he doesn't know they're angels. We'll look at some passages to show you that. He just thinks they're people. The men of the city, they saw these angels. And it says, and by the way, Lot has taken them home. I'm going out of order a little bit. Lot has taken them home and feeding them. And the men of the city called to Lot and said to him, where are the men who came to you tonight? They look like men. Everybody, including Lot, thinks they are. So where are the men? Lot says, only do nothing to these, not angels. Lot says, do nothing to these men, because that's who he thinks they are. And as much as they have come under my roof, come under the shelter of my roof, he's trying to protect them. These are wicked men. I'm not going to go into detail about that. You can read it yourself, but they're wicked. They wish to harm the visitors. And Lot tries to protect them. They're angels. Powerful enough to destroy Sodom, which they're going to do, but Lot doesn't know they're angels. So he's trying to protect the men, he thinks. Then, in verse 10, but the men, now, ever since God identified them as angels to us, the readers, he called them men every time after that. So he's referring to these 2 angels now. But the men reached out their hands because Lot was outside the city. The men were pressing against him, going to harm him, break the door down, get the men inside, they think. The men reached out their hands and brought Lot into the house with them and shut the door. Every appearance of still being human beings. Then the 2 men said to Lot, whom else have you here? Why would God keep calling them men if we know they're angels? Because they appear to be men to everybody, the evil and the good. And so what we're seeing here is a glimpse of Lot's hospitality, even at personal danger to himself and to his daughters, if you know the story. So, back to the 2 angels now. Lot bows down to them with his face to the ground. In verse 2, he says, now behold, my lords. Oh, a sign of respect again. Now there aren't many people as rich as Lot or Abraham. He's no dummy. He probably knows that. And yet he chooses to call the visitors my lords. Similar to what Abraham did. Great respect, which is part of hospitality. Showing our guests, putting them at ease, serving them, putting them above us. Very respectful. Now, behold, my lords, please turn aside into your servant's house. Now, we're back, by the way. I know I'm jumping back and forth to make a point, but we're back in a city square. Lot's begging them to come home with him. Please turn aside into your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Isn't that what Abraham did or had one of his servants do? Got the water, washed the feet. Lot's offering the same thing. Wash your feet. Then you may rise early and go on your way. They said, however, no. We'll spend the night here in the square. Lot knows that's not a good thing and will not give up because he has a love for strangers, a love for people, and he knows it would not be good, not knowing that they're angels, would not be good if they spent the night in the square. Yet he urged them strongly, please, please, honor me, come to my home. So they turned aside to him and entered his house, and he prepared a feast for them, a feast. That's what Abraham did, a feast, and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. Unleavened, just like Abraham did, it doesn't say unleavened there, but had to be fast. Time was of the essence. No time to make the dough, let it rise. So this is unleavened bread, and so was the bread that Sarah made them in. So prepared a feast, they ate, they baked unleavened bread, and they ate. Now the rest of the story, is we're not going to go into it because our study today is hospitality. But here is Lot going at great expense, but more than that, he has lots of money. Great risk in inviting these strangers into his house. He doesn't even know the strangers. Are they bad guys? But he trusts God, lives by faith, and shows hospitality as Abraham did and welcomes them into his home. So why are we reading in the Old Testament? Because, as it says here in Romans 15:4, for whatever was written in earlier times, the Old Testament, whatever was written in earlier times, it was written for our instruction, for us to learn from. These are examples given to us to see what hospitality is all about. And our father Abraham, we're called the sons of Abraham in Galatians 3. Our father Abraham, we got to see his example of hospitality. Back then, quite a bit different when you traveled. Probably same today in Afghanistan or Pakistan or other places, but there were no Starbucks, no fast food places. If you're out there and it's hot and part of that country I've looked at and they don't have a lot of trees, it was really helpful, even if you weren't endangered by human beings. It was really helpful to for someone to give you rest and shade and nutrition. So I look at Lot, and we see a couple things about him. He's in the square. Now, why would Lot be in the city square and not in the gate and not home? We're not told. Wise men, godly men, elders would sit in the gates of cities, but best guess, because he loved people, knew that if people came into this city without some kind of protection, that they would be endangered. My guess is you're looking for opportunity to help. Just a guess. But he did. He did. So he's aware, and then he seizes upon the opportunity. He's aware and concerned. Not only does he notice them, but he has enough concern to take action. And so, I think there's a little parallel there for us today. That could be any day, any time, any place in your life, but especially here where God's people gather together. There are people that walk in our door that don't have a true knowledge of our God. They just don't yet. All of us were there at one time, I'm assuming, unless you're raised by a family of Christians. So they walk in our door without a true knowledge of God. They're looking for something, and their souls are in grave danger, the ultimate danger, equal with or greater than the two angels that visited Sodom. And if we're aware, and I'm impressed at how well we've done as a church, but if we're aware and concerned, that's going to translate into action and love, often hospitality towards our visitors. So just a great parallel. And I think that God wants us to be like Abraham and Lot with that mindset on the spiritual level. And lastly, since we're talking about hospitality, and I haven't defined it, but we will real soon. Since we're talking about hospitality, it just opens doors. It just opens doors to conversations that you just aren't going to have in 10 minutes, 15 minutes here at the building very often. People are relaxed and you're eating food and it's just a different environment and doors can open mightily through hospitality. So we are going to now look at a New Testament verse just to see the word. In Romans 12:13, Paul writes, we are to be contributing to the needs of the saints, that's Christians, saved people, and practicing hospitality. What does that mean exactly? What does hospitality mean? Well, if we define it, it's a Greek word, philoxenos. It's two words put together to make a compound word. Philo, the first half means love. Xenos means stranger. The word hospitality means the love of strangers, the love for strangers. And we're to practice that. And it's kind of funny, but we're even told to practice the love of strangers towards each other, as we'll see next week. It means the love of strangers. And love, biblical love, it always translates into action. True biblical love translates into action, whenever possible anyway. So what does hospitality look like? Well, we got to see Lot. We got to see Abraham already. But it kind of looks like this. There's other ways. I want you to know that there are other ways. But the most common form of hospitality, we see it over and over in the scriptures, is that we invite someone to our homes to share food. That's a really powerful and very common form of hospitality. But there are other forms as well. There are other ways to show it, but that's the most common and perhaps the most powerful because you get to spend a couple hours together typically. So here's an example. We're going to go back to the Old Testament in your mind. Here you are. It's under the reign of Rehoboam. You're under the law of Moses. You're in your house, and your son looks out the window and says, Dad, Dad. If they had windows back then. He looks out the door and says, Dad, who are those people standing in the corner of our field, our wheat field? Who are they? They look like Gentiles to me. And of course, the Gentiles, typically were hated and despised by the Jews. They certainly weren't to marry them or to listen about their idols and false gods. But God had some specific instruction if there was a Gentile walking through the land of Israel or living there even. So they look like Gentiles, Dad. What should we do? What should we do? And here's what the Lord said we should do in Leviticus 19:9 and 10. Now, when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap the very corners of your field. Reaping means to harvest it. You shall not harvest the grain in the corners of your field. So I don't have a nice clean corner here. But let's say that the field is a rectangle. There are 4 corners. Leave that alone. Leave that corner. Don't even touch the grain there. Yes, it's good to eat. Yes, it has monetary value. Do not touch it. Nor shall you gather the gleanings from your harvest. The gleanings are you're harvesting, you're grabbing the wheat, chopping it with a sickle, putting it in a container, chopping the wheat, and you're going to drop some. Maybe the head will break off, or you'll just drop some, or you cut a little more than you meant to cut. You swiped a little bit too wide, and it falls on the ground. Or maybe it falls on the ground by itself. The wind blew some over, or an animal walked through the field and knocks them over. Don't touch it. Do not touch the corners. Do not touch the produce that fell on the ground. He says, same with a vineyard where you have grapes. Nor shall you glean your vineyard, nor shall you gather the fallen fruit of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the needy and the stranger. Stranger would be a Gentile, an alien. I suppose it could be a Jew too, but if you read the other verses on this is with the Gentiles in mind. You leave that alone because needy people might walk through your property, and if it gets rained on and spoiled, that's okay. But you are going to love the stranger and make provision for them if they're on your property or nearby and they're hungry. Now, it was a way to let the poor people and the stranger eat with dignity. It wasn't a handout. They were legally allowed to go onto your property and harvest anything they could from the corners and that fell on the ground, like Ruth does in the book of Ruth. And of course, Boaz told his harvesters, drop some extra. Good masters would sometimes do that for the needy. But it was a way for them to eat but maintain their dignity, because they had to participate and gather the food themselves. They had to work and exert effort to do that. So he says, he finishes it off with, after he says these things, I am the Lord your God. He says that many times in this chapter. I am the Lord your God. He repeats that several times if you read the chapter. So Dad says, yes, it's a Gentile. I can tell by his clothing. But the dad walks up to the Gentile and he says, are you getting enough? If you need any more, there's another corner about 200 yards. See that right there? No one's harvested that yet. So if this isn't enough for you, walk down to that corner and you can get more. Even if it's a Gentile. In this same chapter, a little bit further on, the Lord says, when a stranger, Gentile usually, when a stranger resides with you in your land, you shall not do him wrong. He's not a Jew. Let's rob him. Let's throw stones at him, get him out. No, you shall not do him wrong. In fact, verse 34, the stranger who resides with you shall be to you as the native among you. The Gentile who lives among you, you will treat just like a native Jew. And you shall love him as yourself. Wow. By Jesus' day, that probably wasn't very common. Hopefully it was at times in the land of Canaan. You shall love him as yourself, for you were aliens in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Amen. What's his point? Well, there's several. That's a form of hospitality. And maybe not having a Gentile come into your home, but a form of hospitality is loving him, helping him, meeting the physical needs that they have. It's a form of hospitality. But God goes on to say that he exhibited hospitality to the Israelites when they were aliens themselves in Egypt. They flourished. Depending on how long you think they were there, but at least we'll say a few hundred years, they flourished in Egypt. They grew into a huge nation. They prospered until the last Pharaoh, who didn't know Joseph and was harsh to them. But they flourished the entire time because God put them there and he was hospitable to them. This was part of his plan. When he delivered them, they wandered for a while because they weren't faithful. They wandered for 40 years, but he brought them into a better place, the land of Canaan as well. All kinds of goodness and kindness from God's hand. And God says, you remember that? You were an alien too. You treat them the way I treated you. So we're learning about hospitality from the Lord Yahweh. At the beginning of the chapter, which I'm reading last, verse 2, it says to the Israelites, you shall be holy because I'm holy. And then he tells them how to treat each other. Don't steal. He tells them how to treat the alien. Holy means to be set apart and different, special, unique, wonderful. And he tells the Israelites, I want you to be holy. I want you to be different. I want you to treat your enemies like their family. I want you to be kind and good and thoughtful. And don't take that food in the corners where they've been dropped on the ground. Hospitality from God himself. I am the Lord your God. He's reminding them. This is providence. This when they went to Egypt at the hand of God, not a miracle, because it didn't break the laws of nature, but God's hand, and just perhaps when the Gentile was on their land. Why did he want to be kind to people that were heathens and idolaters? Why? To win souls, right? Even Gentiles back then could be converted to Judaism. Book of Proverbs says, he who is wise, he who wins souls is wise. God has always wanted to save all mankind. He says so to Abraham. All nations, all Gentiles, we bless thee your seed. So kindness, because unkindness does not win souls. Sometimes kindness does. So anyone can show hospitality. I don't know what you're thinking right now. Maybe some of you, or I know some, not maybe, some of you are incredible at hospitality, but anybody can show it, regardless of income level, regardless of how small your house is. It's not dependent upon what you have or don't have. Hospitality typically implies inviting someone to your home for a meal. I've said that already, typically. And I remember the days, more than days, it was a few years when the Brennemans were really strapped. They were financially wondering, will we have groceries tomorrow kind of thing, more than once. And so maybe you're there. So Lisa and I discussed it. I said, look, I didn't say look. I don't say look anymore, but I said, we need to be with Christians, and they need to be with us. Let's have popcorn. Popcorn. We can afford that because we have some. Or coffee. Doesn't that be meal? I don't know what you envision when you envision hospitality, but a big spread like some of you do on special family days with the table's huge and you've got lots of relatives and a turkey and a ham and hospitality is loving strangers, even when they're your Christian brothers and sisters. Acts of kindness. Keep it simple. If you need to, that's okay. There are other options for showing hospitality, such as popcorn. Look at what Jesus says in Matthew 10:42. How much does this cost? And whoever in the name of a disciple gives to one of these little ones, people of faith, even a cup of cold water to drink, truly I say to you, he shall not lose the reward. That's hospitality. That's loving the stranger or loving your neighbor. Just a cup of water. Most of us can do that. My point is the Lord is telling us, poor people can do this. Poor people, people who are struggling, they can exhibit some kind of hospitality that blesses others, changes lives potentially. And then in 2 Corinthians 8:12, again, for us, that for anyone that's struggling, for if the readiness is present, he's talking about giving money for the collection they're making for the saints, but if the readiness is present, if you want to, if you have a desire to give to God's work or to help the poor, if the readiness is present, is acceptable according to what a person has, not according to what they don't have. God's not putting a single dime of value on what it costs you to do this. He's saying, whatever you can do, do that. That's it, simple. And keep it simple. Not according to what he does not have. You know, we sang a song, it caught my eye because it used some of the couple of words that I'm using today, but we sang, in seasons of distress and grief. That was one of the lines in one of your earliest songs. In seasons, sometimes it's the wrong season for someone. Sometimes it's the wrong season, you can do nothing, whether it's because you're temporarily invalid or you've got some fires that need to be put out, that need every bit of your attention, every bit of prayer that you can put into it. And so sometimes you can't show hospitality for a season. It's acceptable according to what you have, time and energy. We just don't want to let fear stop us from doing that. God never accepts fear as an excuse to not do something good. But if now is one of those seasons for you, then God knows that. He's good and graceful. And He knows that those things come up, and God understands. It's not the expense. It's not how fancy or elegant something is if you're showing hospitality, but it's what motivates us. What's behind it? Why would we invite someone over? Because we love them, and maybe we want to be edified, maybe we want to edify them, maybe we just want to strengthen Christian bonds. But it's the motivation, not the expense. Because I remember having a discussion. She and I would say, well, we can't buy a chicken right now. What should we do? Popcorn, coffee, toast. God's hospitality is extreme. It's unmeasurable. So he asks us to invite strangers into our home. But He goes beyond that, and He invites His enemies into His home. Romans 5:10. For while we were enemies to God, we were reconciled to God through the death of His Son. Much more have been reconciled. We shall be saved by His life. But He invites enemies, not strangers, enemies, into His house. But it gets better. Ephesians 2:19. So then, speaking to former Gentiles, so then you are no longer strangers and aliens. That's who we're supposed to invite into our house, strangers and aliens. You're no longer that, but you are fellow citizens with the saints and are of the household of God. So we were enemies. He invites us into His house. Praise God for that. Incredible. Invites us into the house, but it still gets better. Not only does He, hey, come and rest and let me feed you and come into my house. He doesn't do that. We're fellow citizens. That means we now belong. But more than that, we're not only of His household, for you are all children of God. Started as enemies, strangers and aliens, invites us into His house, which is His spiritual house, the household of God. 1 Timothy 3:15. Ephesians 2:19 invites us into His household. When we enter His household the biblical way, and we become His children. So from enemies to children, how often does that happen? Pretty amazing. Through faith in Christ Jesus. So hospitality seems to be at the very center of God's heart. Don't know if you've practiced it in the past. Some of you for sure have. But it's at the very center of His heart. He is the most hospitable of all, with the greatest example of all. The very center of His heart. And that's exactly what it's about. Hospitality. It's about the heart, not the food, not if your front room is clean. You know, oh, here's a visitor, no one's invited them over, but I don't want to invite them over. My front room messy. Done that, been there. Kick the toys out of the way. Sorry for the mess, but we just want to spend some time with you. It's about the heart, not the setting, not the food, about the heart. So I'd like to leave you with this. It's a new year. Some people, it doesn't make any difference, but our God is a God of second chances. I love that. And third and umpteenth chances. He lets us go to bed every night. We sleep, and it kind of leaves behind the stress of the day before. We wake up most of the time refreshed and ready for another day by God's plan. And I'm thinking maybe a fresh start for this year. If showing hospitality is uncommon, don't know if it is or not, but if it's uncommon to some of you, a really great objective would be to set an objective, to set a goal and say, you know, this year, 2 people, even if they don't come over, I'm going to invite 2 people here at the building or from work or my neighbors or somebody. I'm going to invite 2 people to my house this year. If you already do that, then up the number. But I'm going to invite 2 people. And if you're really nervous about it and really afraid, then practice a little bit. Like a suggestion, invite your preacher over, keep it simple, Jamocha almond fudge. Remember that Jamocha, write it down, almond fudge. No, keep it simple, but set. And I don't want to call it an objective or a goal. I would like to say, make the decision. Don't set a goal. Make the decision in prayer with God and with your family. I will invite 2 people this year, or whatever number you think would be pleasing to God. Make the decision, set the dates. First one will be Sunday, March the 17th, or whatever day it is. The next one will be July. But set some dates, because loving strangers and loving our brethren translates into loving God, because that's what He's all about and wants for us. Thank you. Next week we'll look more at a more crystal, clearer plan of hospitality in the New Testament. Meanwhile, thank you so much. If you have any spiritual needs at all, let us know. We'd love to help. Let's stand and sing the song of invitation.